Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to ISRI's Spotlight on the Economy. I'm Mark Lewin, I'm the chair of ISRI, and I got the job today of moderating. We have two speakers this morning. Our first speaker is going to be Ken Simonson, who's the chief economist of the Associated General Contractors. And our second speaker is Andrew Acho, and he's basically come out of the Ford company, and so he's got a lot of interesting things from the auto industry for us. So I'm going to introduce them more in detail shortly, but what I want to start with is a couple of slides that we have that we put together. And for anybody who doesn't know, ISRI put together about 5 years ago an economic impact study of what the recycling industry does for the United States. And so you have a screen here, a slide here. We asked John Dunham and Associates, and actually asked is the wrong word, we paid John Dunham and Associates to do some work for us and assess what our economic impact is. And you can see that here. We update that roughly every 2 years. You have to kind of do that just to make sure that, you know, we haven't gone too far one way or the other. But you can see what the impact is in terms of taxes. And then it's broken down in terms of states. So you can go to you can take those figures, you can go to your legislators, national, state, local, and you can say, this is what we're doing for the country, this is what we're doing for the city, this is what we're doing for the state. So legislators kind of tend to eat that up because they want to know how big you are in terms of what your strength is, and maybe what they can get from political contributions from you too. But the key point is without quantifying those figures, we have no idea. So that's why we did that. This week the figures will be available they're updated really for 2016, they're not 2017, and I'm sure I don't have to tell you guys that. But we do this by commodity, we do it by exports, and we can do it for individual companies if that's of interest to you. So this is something very important, again, that you can use for advocacy. And if you'll show up tomorrow, I might talk a little bit about advocacy in the morning. So I don't have too much more for you, so I want to get right to our speakers. Please, I don't think we have microphones, but actually the acoustics in here are pretty good. So if you have questions, please feel free to ask them when we get to that. And I think we'll wait until both of our speakers have presented. And then if you don't have questions, I will. So just be forewarned. Ken Simonson's going to lead off for us. Again, he's the chief economist of the Associated General Contractors of America, the leading trade association for the construction industry, and he's been in that position since 2001. His weekly summary of economic news relevant to construction, the Data Digest, goes to 47,000 subscribers. He was the 2012-2013 president of the National Association for Business Economics, the professional organization for individuals who use economics in their work. Currently, he serves as an appointed member of the Census Scientific Advisory Committee and the Bureau of Labor Statistics Data Users Advisory Committee. Ken has 40 years of experience analyzing, advocating, and communicating about economic and tax issues. He earned a BA in economics from the University of Chicago and an MA in economics from my alma mater, Northwestern University. Ken, welcome.
Thank you, and it's great to be back in front of an ISRI crowd. I think that it's really great that you've put together these fact sheets on the economic impact of the scrap industry. AGC had long had state-by-state impact sheets, but our national impact analysis was done 8 years ago, and I was just discussing last night whether we should get that updated. So I'm going to be talking to Joe Picard afterwards about that. I think there's always a hunger for that information, whether you're a lobbyist going into a congressional office, whether you're talking to a reporter, or just a local member of the association. And AGC has 92 chapters across the country. So I hope many of you will be involved with your local or state chapter, because obviously construction is a very important both end market and source of scrap materials. In fact, what I want to cover today is what's been happening to construction and how policy changes in the overall economy are affecting that. Let's start by laying out the history of construction activity since the high point, which was a good deal earlier than the rest of the economy. The graph on the left shows the construction spending put in place. This is a series the Census Bureau updates on the first of each month. The spending topped out way back in February of 2011, more than 11 years, February of 2006, more than 11 years ago. It plunged until the beginning of 2011, and it's been coming back ever since. But if you can see that horizontal line across just below the top, it shows that construction spending as of the latest month available, that was February of this year, was still 1% below peak. Well, that may sound pretty good, but it doesn't take into account the inflation that's happened over the last 11 years. To get a better handle on how much real activity there is, it's very hard to deflate all types of construction, from home renovation to highway and underground, but you can count the number of people working in the industry as employees, and that followed a similar course. It topped out just 2 months later in April of 2006. It hit bottom at the same time as construction spending in January of 2011. And as you can see, it's been growing quite steadily also. But as of February, it was still 11% below that peak level. There are a lot of things that have added to uncertainty in the last 6 months, not to mention the last 95 days, or let's say the last hour since the Treasury started briefing people on the President's tax reduction plan. Let me just briefly touch on a few of these. They affect the whole economy, but my focus will be on what they mean for construction. The most exciting thing, certainly for the stock market the day after the election and for quite a while since, was the prospect that somehow we would get $1 trillion more spent on infrastructure. Well, that's a dream that people are starting to wake up from. It might still happen, but we haven't seen any specifics on how. There was a paper 6 months ago by then advisors to now President Trump. They're now both in his administration, Secretary of Commerce Wilbur Ross and Trade Advisor Peter Navarro. They talked about huge tax credits, but so far as I've heard, there is nothing in the actual tax reform proposal that would relate to infrastructure. Nor was there anything in the so-called skinny budget that came out a month ago. The President's more detailed budget, they still haven't announced a release date, but it sounds increasingly as if it won't be until maybe the 21st of May or later that week. So we're still holding our breaths and starting to turn blue, wondering exactly what that infrastructure package will contain, how it will be financed, how it would be distributed among modes, what agencies would get to decide to do it, where it would go geographically. And in my own forecast, which I'll get to in a couple of minutes, I have not assumed any increase in infrastructure spending on any of the categories, whether transportation modes, water, wastewater, et cetera, based on this proposal. Second area of uncertainty is on immigration. And again, there was breaking news, as they like to say on cable TV. Just yesterday, the administration told that they can't go forward with their second attempt on limiting immigration. And so the question that affects construction and many other industries, and I'm sure some of the trades that you are dealing with, is where are those workers going to come from? If they're not coming from abroad, they weren't born here 18 or 21 years ago in sufficient numbers to make up for the people who are retiring this year and for the next decade or so. And so without immigration, I think our labor force growth, which has already dropped from about 1% a year down to a half or even a third of a percent a year, that could go to zero. And it's really hard to get economic growth higher if you don't have the inputs, specifically labor inputs. You can do better if you have better productivity, but that's also been a major problem for the economy. So the implications of policy that is keeping people in, deporting far more people, and sending a message to people who have a choice about what country to work in, that maybe they'd be better off avoiding the U.S. or leaving the U.S. on their own before they're forced out, those things could really hurt productivity of both the most skilled workers and the unskilled ones who have been hard to replace as Americans shun those jobs. Third, and I know this is of major concern to a lot of you, trade policy initiatives. Again, news made yesterday with the imposition and the start of the regulatory process for setting tariffs on Canadian lumber, but already provisional tariffs at a 20% rate mean a big jump in the price of new houses. And this comes on top of reports yesterday from Case-Shiller Index and others that house prices are already moving up at a steady rate of more than 5%. That's well over the rate of increase in personal incomes. So the implications here for housing purchases are pretty negative. That may actually help the multifamily industry that AGC members help to support. But on the other side, we've also seen major new tariffs, anti-dumping duties put on some kinds of steel used in construction, and the prospect that there will be more. My bigger concern, though, is what are the implications for overall U.S. trade? Clearly, our trading partners are not going to sit idly by as we put on high new tariffs or quotas. And if we do get a few more plants built or expanded here, that's good for some companies. But I think it will come at an unacceptably high cost if we're then facing discrimination or, let's say, higher barriers to exports by agricultural producers and food processors, by other manufacturers that are export-focused now, on transportation companies hauling those goods to market, and to ports like what we have right outside our door here. I think the U.S. economy, and with it the construction industry's customers, have a lot more to lose than to gain from the initiatives I've seen so far. Well, regulatory relief is something that's really been popular with many businesses, and indeed, this is the one area that I think President Trump has been able to legitimately claim some victories in so far. Some by executive order, some by congressional use of the previously dormant Congressional Review Act. He has signed into law repealers, permanent repealers for some of the regulatory initiatives of the last several years. And he's put a freeze, essentially, on many types of new regulations. But before popping the champagne corks, I think a lot of firms have to look at what is the source of the regulatory burdens that are driving up their costs or delaying their projects. And in many cases, it's state or local regulations that's not going to be touched by this, or it's long-established rules that will take many steps to unwind. An example is the Keystone XL pipeline, where the president quite famously undid the prohibition on that President Obama had signed. But the reality is that pipeline is not going to be built from Canada south until a state that's 2 states south of the border, Nebraska, settles on what routing it considers permissible. So even for an interstate project, you can get held up at a state's borders. Healthcare rewrite. We're still in a state of great uncertainty about that. The implication for construction, I think, has been that hospitals have held off doing expansions and modernizations until they know what their reimbursement utilization rates will be. And indeed, the data so far show that hospital construction was starting to rise into the fall of last year, but has since then tapered off. Fiscal policy, Two prongs, both in play this week. One, what will the budget be? What will the spending levels be? For this week, we're wondering, will spending on so-called discretionary items go to zero on Friday night if Congress isn't able to pass an extension of the federal funding through the rest of this fiscal year that the President is willing to sign, but also waiting, as I said, to see what the budget proposal and what Congress adopts out of that for 2018 are. The so-called skinny budget actually cut some infrastructure spending, and so while the rhetoric was for more spending and while Congress passed the so-called FAST Act in December of 2015, at the moment, we're not seeing that spending. 2016 spending levels are still in place, and it looks as if they will be through September. The bigger question now on fiscal policy, though, is what sort of tax cut will we get, if any? Will it favor C corporations or pass-throughs? And construction firms fit both categories. We have some S-corps, some partnerships, even sole proprietorships. But again, I think the more important impact is on the demand side for construction. If the value of the home mortgage deduction and property tax deduction are cut either by being capped or just because tax rates are lowered enough that fewer people are going to be itemizing, that again could cut into demand for single-family housing, but it could mean that more people therefore want to stay in rental and multifamily housing. But if the value of deductions for investment interest and property depreciation, real property depreciation, are reduced, that would be a negative for investors in apartments, hotels, offices, stores, and warehouses. And if the value of municipal bond issue interest is reduced, there would be fewer bond issues by states and localities for schools and local infrastructure projects. All of this obviously plays into monetary policy and can affect the rate at which the Fed raises interest rates or long-term rates that are so important to many municipal borrowers, to home mortgage borrowers, how they would be affected. Well, with all of that uncertainty, I hope I've given myself enough cover to go to the forecast, which, as you'll see on this table, I have provided a fair amount of wiggle room. This shows the total private and public non-residential spending that took place in 2015 versus 2014, 2016 versus 2015, and then my forecast for this year. And the rows are in descending order of 2016 size, and these are the categories as defined by the Census Bureau. They're a bit quirky in some cases. The top line shows that 2015 was a good year for non-residential construction, 7% increase. Slowed down a little bit in 2016, and if you scan down those two columns, you'll see the composition changed a lot. In 2015, we had a huge, we had an increase in every category except one. Unfortunately, the one that declined was the largest, and it was a huge negative. By 2016, there were more gives and takes, that you had 4 categories decline, but the overall increase was almost as much. For this year, I think basically we'll be in that same range, at best 6% growth, but perhaps as little as 2%. And again, these don't take into account inflation, so 2% would really be standing still. Very quickly to go through the categories, and I encourage you to get the full set of slides from me or from ISRI because I have a lot more detail in them that I'm not going to put you to sleep with this morning. But the biggest category is what Census Bureau calls power, and that fits our the common definition of power: generation, transmission, and local distribution, including both conventional power plants and renewables. But Census adds to that everything that happens in the oil and gas field other than the drilling itself, which is mining, and also pipeline activity. So in 2016, we had the renewal of the wind and solar production tax credits. And indeed, more solar capacity was added than any other kind of generating capacity. We also had wind projects and the start of some gas-fired power plants. all of that will continue at an even greater pace this year and I think next year. In addition, we saw the rig count for oil and gas drilling bottom out last May, and now it has almost doubled. So construction is closely associated to where the new drilling is taking place. You need an access road, you need some site preparation, a pad for the well, housing for the pumping and processing machinery, and some kind of gathering lines or storage tanks. And then some natural gas pipelines are going ahead, particularly the Rover, a $4 billion project from the Marcellus and Utica fields through Ohio and Michigan. The Atlantic Sunrise down from that same area into the southeast, and some shorter ones. So I think the outlook for power is very positive this year. Highway and street construction, on the other hand, that actually slowed down. It started 2016 in great shape, and as the year progressed, actually flattened out. And we have had a number of states increase their gas taxes as recently as this week, with some more actions pending, but it's still only fewer than half the states. And the federal government, of course, we haven't seen an increase in that gas tax or other funding, permanent funding sources for 24 years now. So it's going to be a very modest increase, I think, in highway spending. Educational, we have had a lot of bond issues passed at the local school district level in the last couple of years, and I think the K through 12 public school market remains healthy. At the higher ed level, though, some states are feeling a fiscal crunch again and have really cut spending again for their state universities, or certainly for their community colleges. So that piece has been steeply negative. Third piece of educational, private, depends very heavily on capital campaigns and endowments. And with the stock market hitting a new high yesterday, at least some of the indexes, those campaigns are doing quite well. So educational looks like a solid winner this year and into next year. Manufacturing had the biggest slide last year, having been the superstar of construction in 2015, up 33%. It went negative last year. A lot of investment in auto plants. We'll hear a lot more about what's happening on the auto side. But it's not just autos, it's other transportation equipment, heavy trucks and trailers, rail cars and locomotives, even jet aircraft and barges. All of those were expanding in 2014, finished work throughout 2015, 2016, and haven't built on the same scale since then, aren't likely to for a while as those orders remain somewhat depressed. The other big piece of manufacturing, so-called chemical manufacturing, we had ethane crackers, we had fertilizer plants, petrochemical plants, natural gas liquefaction trains. Those took a pause, but I see more action coming in the near future. Shell finally decided to go ahead with its huge ethane cracker outside of Philadelphia. That's going to bring on some other projects. I think we'll have another round of these huge natural gas liquefaction plants on the coasts. So by 2018, manufacturing could be a positive, but definitely a negative this year. Commercial is a term that everybody uses in different ways. For census, it's definitely a unique definition: retail, warehouse, and farm. And every month we're hearing about a new chain that is closing all of its stores, it's going online only, or it's going to shut down a large number of stores. So the outlook for retail construction of the standalone type, a strip shopping center, a shopping mall, remains very dim. Where you are seeing spending on retail, it's in the first floor of a multi-story building. You may get that grocery store on the first floor and apartments above it, or it's remodeling a space that another tenant has left. The action has been with warehouse construction. All over the country, Amazon has put up giant 1 to 2 million square foot, very automated warehouses. Now they and others are putting what I call click and collect points inside metro areas, where you can order something online in the morning, have it delivered to your home or office in the afternoon, or you can go to pick it up yourself and perhaps do some window shopping. So I think we'll still see growth because of that, but those are smaller facilities, higher cost land, and sometimes retrofitting an old building, but the total amount of spending is going to grow much more slowly. Similarly, office construction really did great for the past 2 years, and I think it's still going to do well based on announcements we've heard in the first 4 months of this year. Marriott moving from a traditional suburban office park into a downtown-like suburban Bethesda, Maryland, right near a transit stop, a bike path, surrounded by housing and restaurants and entertainment. Quite different from where corporations chose to locate for several decades. Caterpillar moving its headquarters from Peoria, Illinois, where it's been for more than a century, to somewhere in Chicago. Then you do have new suburbs growing up, like Plano, Texas, attracting thousands of employees from different companies around the country. But again, it's much more like a mini city than it is the endless parking and greenery around low-rise buildings. Transportation is a mixed category. 2 years ago, the railroads were building track like crazy to haul goods from ports that would benefit from the widening of the Panama Canal, or to keep traffic calling on those West Coast ports, and to haul oil out of areas that didn't have enough pipeline capacity. Now the railroads have been losing money. They've pretty well built out the track they wanted. So the action for transportation spending has been on the public side, particularly airport construction. I know that Louis Armstrong Airport has been doing some, but any of you who flew in or through a major hub, I'm sure you've seen action there. Many of those places have plans that extend out 6 or even 10 years. A lot of it's inside the terminal, but there's also some landside, the approach roads or a consolidated car center. Some of it is adding gates or improving taxiways, de-icing and so forth. So that will be spread quite widely. But the other public categories, transit, passenger rail, ports, they all depend on federal money to some degree, and I don't see that forthcoming. So I think we'll have very modest growth in transportation spending. Healthcare, I already said, we'd seen a slowdown. I think that's likely to continue. And then finally, lodging construction. This has been just rolling along at a great rate for several years, but for the last several months, that has flattened out. And with reports that far fewer travelers are going to come here from abroad, and many more markets having appeared to topped out in average daily room rate and occupancy rate, and the product of that known as RevPAR, revenue per available room, I think hotel developers are going to get a lot more cautious in the next year. So that one could actually go negative by 2018. Well, let me move on from this. As I said, I have a bunch of slides that show in more detail what's happened in each segment. Those are followed by slides with some bullet points about each of these things. I'm going to skip past all of those, though, so that we can talk a little bit about the labor supply situation. And that really is the major worry for contractors, and I think it is for many other segments of the economy also. Just very briefly, I mentioned a multifamily versus single family. You can see that multifamily is the green wedge on the top graph. It's gone from nearly invisible to the biggest dollar amount, again, without adjusting for inflation ever, the biggest share of new multi and single family, the pink segment, it's been in decades. But on the bottom graph, you can see a big slowdown in multifamily. Still, as of February, had grown at an 11% rate over the past 12 months, better than single family, but that's about to reverse. Single family, I think, will finish the year with near double-digit growth, perhaps double-digit. Multifamily slowing down to just below that, and by 2018, probably a flattening in multifamily. But the longer-term trend, definitely more building of multifamily than as a share of the total residential market than we saw for many years. Population growth has been quite uneven. This map shows what happened between July 2015, July 2016. U.S. population growth as a whole slowed to the lowest level in 30 years, and I don't see it reviving. If anything, it's going to go lower. Report today from the Pew Research Center that net immigration of illegal immigrants has been declining for several years now. And illegal immigration, as I said, may also be discouraged. So we're not getting a pop in the birth rate. I think growth will slow. And where is it going to be slowing? In these states in pink and deep red, the red meaning lost population, 8 of them for the first time since the oil bust of the mid-'80s. Overall U.S. population growth, I misspoke, it was actually the lowest since the Great Depression. The growth is in the Southeast, in Texas, in the mountain states, in the Northwest. I think that's going to continue for quite a while, and that's obviously an important determinant for many types of construction, particularly housing, schools, retail, consumer services, also the tax base for state and local construction. But the picture for construction employment itself is a good deal greener. As of February, 43 states were adding construction jobs compared to 1 year before. When you break it down within metro areas, though, it's a much more speckled map. That is, even states that are generally adding construction jobs, you have some metro areas that have lost jobs or have stagnated. Now, obviously, that's partly because of local economic conditions or a big project finishing up. But it also reflects the difficulty that contractors are having in filling jobs. AGC of America has been doing a survey for several years on workforce conditions. And in our latest survey, over 2/3 of the firms said that they were having trouble finding one or another type of craft worker. Hardest to fill were carpenters. 60% of the firms that employ carpenters were having trouble finding them. The home builders, very similar result for both rough and finished carpenters. But as you can see, it goes through quite a range of occupations: electricians, plumbers, roofers, concrete workers, and on the salaried side, project managers and supervisors. Half the firms said they were having trouble filling those positions. What are firms doing about it? A lot of different approaches. Raising base pay, providing incentives, bonuses, introducing new benefits, or increasing contributions to existing benefits. But they're also doing a lot more in-house training because the people they're hiring are much less experienced than they used to be. As a result, they're also paying more overtime, either because they don't have enough experienced workers, so the ones who are there are having to stay on the job longer, or they're using those workers to train the new ones. To a much more limited extent, they're doing things like investing in labor-saving equipment, tools, machinery, using off-site prefabrication, or building information modeling. But these are the waves of the future. Last year, there was a demonstration of a bricklaying robot. I think we've by now all heard about 3D printers putting up entire buildings. I think that's still a gimmick, but I think you'll start to see various forms of robotics doing pieces of construction. Construction's already a huge user of drones to document conditions and progress on construction, and to keep people from having to get into hard-to-reach and dangerous locations. So much more coming on the technology side. And I hope that will also help not just to replace workers, but to attract workers to the industry. The one thing contractors haven't been able to do is fill jobs fast enough. Construction hires have been flat in February of the last really decade. This snapshot in the upper left shows that construction hiring in February of each year has stayed in the 200 and some to a little over 300,000 range. But meanwhile, job openings have soared from about 50,000 in February 2011 to well over 150,000 at the end of February this year. So that says to me contractors can't find those workers. Why? Because the number of people who say, I was unemployed last month, I actively looked for work, my previous job was in construction, has tumbled from over 2.5 million, or just about 2.5 million in February 2010, to about 750,000 in February of this year. Predictable result? Wages in the form of average hourly earnings, and this is industry-wide, not just the new hires, have started moving up pretty sharply. Just a 1% increase as recently as February 2014. Now it's up around 3.5%. Last point, materials costs. Whether you're looking at diesel fuel, steel products, copper, aluminum, all of those started moving up at the beginning of 2011, but then have come down right into early 2016. These are producer price indexes from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. There are about 10,000 of them. I haven't graphed them all, but I do put together about 70 of them in a set of tables each month that I send out with my data digest that I'd be glad to have you subscribe to. For each of these, I set them at 100 at the beginning of 2011, so you can see how they moved over time and relative to each other. Here, the story is similar, although the magnitude certainly different. Prices rebounded sharply over the last 12 or 15 months, but still well below where they were even 3 years ago. Other materials, quite varied stories. Gypsum products like wallboard have been rising at the beginning of each year rather sharply and then kind of flat the rest of the year. In 2016, we didn't get that bump. It did come again at the beginning of 2017, but I don't think we're going to see a sustained increase. I think that may actually trail off over the rest of the year. Paving mixtures, unlike diesel fuel, didn't have the sharp increase that was sustained, so those prices are actually still a little below where they were a year ago. And then flat glass, various concrete products, rising slowly and pretty steadily. So to put it all together, I think that construction spending, which had a very good year in 2015, slowed down some in 2016. It will be close to the 2016 level. If everything breaks right, which I frankly don't expect, it will exceed 2016. If everything goes badly, which I also don't expect, we'll still see growth, but very limited. The mix keeps changing. In 2015, you had huge growth in all the residential categories. By 2016, much slower on single family. That one's coming back this year. The multifamily is slowing down, but because single family is a much bigger market, should be a good year for residential. Private non-residential, quite steady overall growth over the last 2 years, 8% a year. Slower this year because some categories like manufacturing staying negative. Others like office, which had an incredible 25% growth last year, will slow down, though it may still be double-digit growth. Public construction actually was negative last year. I think it'll crawl out of that hole this year, but not very far. Materials costs, which had several years of decline, starting to rise. It's not going to be like before the recession when as soon as you hung up the phone, that price was gone, and if you called back, you had to pay more. We will see selective price increases, big one in lumber, big one so far in some steel products, but other things still fairly quiet. The bigger worry, employment costs starting to rise at a more sustained rate, but really the continuing worry, where to find the workers. So that's my story. I'm sticking with it till I get new data. When I do, I'll put it in the Data Digest, my weekly one-page summary of economic news relevant to construction. You're all welcome to subscribe by emailing me at simonsandk@agc.org or contact Joe Picard at ISRI. So with that, let me stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Just as a reminder for everybody here, what I think we'll do is we'll take some time for questions after Andy, our second speaker, presents. So without further ado, let me introduce Andy. Andrew Acho is a nationally recognized expert on practical environmental initiatives that help make the world a better place and save money. Since retiring from Ford in 2006, Andy Acho has become a valuable resource for organizations interested in protecting the environment and improving performance. Andy Acho is also a contributing author to the book, Becoming a Green Innovator, Encouraging Green Business Practices. In his role as Worldwide Director of Environmental Outreach and Strategy for Ford Motor Company, a job Bill Ford created for him, Acho championed the development and implementation of more aggressive, proactive environmental stewardship actions that not only protected the environment, but also saved the company millions of dollars annually. Andy Acho began driving environmental stewardship efforts for Ford Motor Company in 1990. He launched and led Ford's Recycling Action Team, the RAT Patrol, which has worked for over a decade, proactively developing and implementing uses for post-consumer recycled materials, including plastic and rubber. These materials are developed to perform as well as or better than the materials they replace while being financially viable. The team's success in this area includes the annual transformation of more than 50 million 2-liter soda pop bottles 1 million bottle caps, and 27 million square feet of old carpeting into reliable vehicle components. Andy Acho also initiated and led Ford's success in recycling more than 10 million tires into environmentally responsible rubber products used for athletic fields, mulch, playground materials, therapeutic riding arenas, and roads. Please welcome Andy.
Thanks, Mark. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. All right. You know what? I'm going to start off by picking on Mark and Jonathan Levy. You might be interested to know how I got to be one of your speakers. Jonathan first called me, then Mark, and they said, you know, we have a session we might consider you for, but I have some personal questions for you. And I said, sure, no problem. I heard you weren't born in the United States. Well, I said, that's true. I was born in Baghdad, Iraq. Did you come here legally? I said, yeah. My dad waited 19 years to get a visa. He applied every year, and by the time he got the visa, he couldn't bring his wife and 3 kids, and we had to wait 2 more years to get here. I said, what's this all about? He said, just a couple more questions. Well, how do you feel about the United States? I said, well, I've been to 45 different countries, and I think the United States is the greatest country on earth. He said, what about our Constitution? I said, Mark, where are you going with this? He says, just a couple more. I said, well, I think it's a brilliantly written document when you consider how long ago it was. He says, one final question. You know, we have a First Amendment. How do you feel about that? The First Amendment? I said, well, I happen to be the greatest advocate of free speech you'll ever hear. He says, good. I'd like you to give one of those free speeches on April 26th. A brilliant negotiator, but that's how we got started. We'll joke about many things, ladies and gentlemen. Environmental stewardship isn't one of them. There is a saying that goes like this: the earth belongs to all of our people, some of them living, some dead, but most have not yet been born. Think about that. Most have not yet been born. We have an obligation to future generations, but we'll get into that momentarily. First, in order to have an auto industry outlook, who am I to give an outlook? So I consulted with my former boss, Bill Ford, had lunch with him on March 22nd. Mark Fields, the CEO of Ford Motor Company, he and I went to the same executive management training course together at Duke University. He ended up being the CEO. I ended up being a guy that introduces him from time to time. And finally, David Cole, who's with the University of Michigan and well-known in the automotive industry. I won't give you a whole lot, but I'll give you some of the information. Bill Ford says our industry is changing faster than it has in the last 100 years. Think about that. Ford Motor Company started in 1903, so what he's saying is it's changing faster than it ever has. And now we're becoming an era of connectivity and smart mobility. Also, we're developing ways to move people and things, because that's what we're good at. Mark Fields, slightly different, but same theme. We're moving from just an auto company to an auto and mobility company. The way he describes it is, we have 1 foot in the present, 1 foot in the future. David Cole, on the other hand, explained it this way. We had lunch, and I actually heard him give a talk, and he's a great guy. He said the auto future will be fast, furious, and uncertain. And the business model that the auto industry has been using no longer is viable. It has to change. What's he expect? He says disruptions are likely. There are energy issues, politics and economy, obviously, and we have to be concerned about interest rates. So, because I don't know much about interest rates, and you just heard an economist who's a lot more knowledgeable than I am, I did get to spend last weekend with a member of the Federal Reserve Board so I could understand a little bit more. And I said, give me some simple things that give you an overview If I had known Ken was going to be here, I would have passed on this. If I had known his background, I should say, because obviously he really knows his stuff. I said, give me two things that I can present. Tell me about the monetary policy. Tell me about interest rate outlook. On the monetary policy, he expects that the prices are going to be stable. He expects a 2% inflation objective. He expects maximum and full employment is what they're pushing for. They're hoping for a sustained growth, a balanced approach, and they would like to stay away from volatility. What about interest rates? They're going to stay fairly low. There'll be increases. Again, these are outlooks. And they expect rates to be at about 3% by 2020. When I sent him my slides Sunday, he sent it back and said, add that phrase at the bottom. The federal funds rate is expected to be around 3% by 2020 if the economic conditions don't change. So when you're an economist, you have to be accurate. So one of the things of concern is, what about the new administration? Should we be worried about it? You already heard about some of the topics, so I can't spend any time on it. But we're talking about trade, regulations, economics, taxes, international relations. And when I put this slide together, I put the unforeseeable. Little did I realize that there'd be something like Venezuela taking over the plant from General Motors and all of a sudden nationalizing it. That's unforeseen. Some of the selected major issues that David Cole put out, and I've added to them. We need mobility solutions, autonomous vehicles. We have to be concerned about technology materials, manufacturing talent, and let me call that labor, that Ken actually touched on better than I'm going to, fuels and CAFE, and finally, my favorite subject, sustainability. Let's go to manufacturing talent, and I wish I had changed that to labor. We're talking about boomers. Those of us that are chronologically gifted are retiring. Now, jobs today require special skills. Our pipeline and education isn't sufficient. Ken touched on it again. We will be, because of our rate of growth here, something like 2 million plus people short for the jobs that are required, and manufacturing becomes very high tech. It used to be where 95% of even high school dropouts could get a job in a factory that's well paying. That's no longer the case, ladies and gentlemen. What about auto power plants? Not necessarily of interest to you, but I'll give it to you anyway. We're looking at and continuing to use gasoline, diesel, electric, hybrid, hydrogen, fuel cells. I drove fuel cell vehicles 20 years ago. They're still on the road. So we really don't know everything that's coming down the road, but we need to be concerned. Why? We still have CAFE standards. For those of you that don't know what CAFE is, corporate average fuel economy, where they tell the auto industry what kind of vehicles they're going to produce in terms of the fuel economy. So we have to look at what's a carbon footprint? What's a policy on that? What are credits? What are the energy issues? What are the politics of it? And cost and value. Let me tell you why I added that. Here's why. Gasoline prices have fluctuated. We've had them as low as $1.50. Those of you that are chronologically gifted might remember 20 cents per gallon, but let's go to $1.50 at a minimum. Now they're closer to $2.25 maybe. So I looked at $1.50, $3, and $5, again with Dr. David Cole. Let me see what happens if you look at the red line at the top. If you had a truck that was getting you 10 miles to the gallon, or a car, and you go to 30 miles per gallon, how much fuel do you use? How much money do you spend on fuel if you drive 15,000 miles a year? You spent $7,500. If you improve your fuel economy by 20 miles per gallon, you go all the way down to $2,500 if you see those numbers. That's a savings of $5,000 a year. That's tremendous. Let's go to the next step. If you go from 30 miles per gallon, where you're spending $2,500, and you go all the way to 50, your cost goes down from $2,500 to $1,500, a savings of $1,000. Now get down to $1.50 per gallon, and from 10 to 30, you go from $22.50 to $7.50, a savings of $1,500 a year. Now, if you go from $7.50, which is at 30 miles per gallon, to 50 miles per gallon, you only take it down to $450, you save $300. When you save $300 a year, you're likely, from an economic standpoint only, not going to spend thousands of dollars and have the industry spend billions to get that next 30 miles voluntarily. So I just want you to know it makes a difference of what gasoline prices are. As I mentioned, David Cole said the old business model is no longer viable. What's he mean by that? Well, he had very fancy charts, and I've got it simplified. And that is, we used to produce physical prototypes, actual things that you can see, and it took months, many months, 12 months, to build some of the prototypes. But now we do it virtually, and you can do it quickly, and if you make a change, it's not that big a deal. We used to have vertical integration. We own things. Some of you may remember old Henry Ford built the Rouge plant in Dearborn, Michigan, where you had raw materials come in one end and completed vehicles going out the other without help from anywhere else. And he had his own ships, his own trucks. He was able to move all those vehicles all over. We don't do that anymore. At Ford, we used to own Volvo. We owned a controlling interest of Mazda. We owned Jaguar. We owned Aston Martin. We don't do that anymore either. Things used to be regional, they're now global. Very structured companies, now a lot more flexible. It was about individuals, about leaders, and all of that. But now we have team efforts. Jobs for life. I spent 46 years at Ford. I could have spent longer. I remember telling Bill on the way back from some event we had, it's time to hang it up after 45 years. And he says, I'll give you two answers, no and hell no. I stuck around an extra year. But we had slow moving because it takes us 3 years to 5 years to introduce a new vehicle. It doesn't take that long for Apple, Google, and some of our competitors, I'll call them competitors, to be able to introduce a new product. So we need to be able to move much faster. Now, autonomous vehicle mobility solutions. Ken asked me to cover this. All right, for the next hour and a half, I'll tell you all about it. Or I can do it in one slide. That, ladies and gentlemen, was from the Wall Street Journal on March 15th. It took me a long time to find a way to be able to get all that info together. Look at this. If you look on the outside, you got Audi, BMW, Daimler, Ford, VW, Fiat, Chrysler, Toyota, GM. It doesn't even list Tesla yet. And look at all the people they're involved with, all of the relationships that are going on. Super complicated. Everybody's working on it, but you're going to see it coming because we need it. Those of you that have been to India and China and all that, you're not supposed to see this, so it makes sense. There are mega cities around, 20 million people in one city. Now, that's a problem, but it's also a problem. It doesn't have to be in those countries. It can be our own. Today, we have 900 million to 1 billion vehicles on the road. And you know what? That really isn't sustainable. I go to LA several times with my wife. We have grandkids out there, but also the people that book my speeches are out there, and I'm on a board out there. So we drive from LA to Santa Barbara. It should be 90 miles, 90 minutes. It's taken us over 3-4 hours sometimes, and you can't do that. That's not sustainable. So if we're going to talk about sustainability, we have to define sustainability. All of you know what it is, but I have it simply stated. It's the ability of the present generation to do what it wants with the materials that they need without sacrificing the ability of future generations to do the same thing. That's not that complicated. Why is it even important? Well, for the longest time in the post-industrial revolution, we've been mismanaging our capital. We have resources, and we have lots of resources. And we make things out of those resources. Then we had waste. Now, what did we do with it? We threw it away. Where is a way? There is no way. For the longest time, we thought we wouldn't have enough landfill space. You guys have done a great job in minimizing that because you have found reasons to be able to use those materials, and we, the automotive industry at least, have found materials that we needed so we could make the world a better place. Speaking of that, I asked Bill 25 years ago, to put things in his own words so I don't speak for him. We happened to be in the Atlantic rainforest of Brazil when we taped this. Excuse how he's dressed.
It always bothered me that Ford, as a company, was seen as an environmental bad guy, and that clearly the auto industry over time had been part of the problem that the world has faced environmentally, and I felt that it was very important that Ford get out in front of the issue and become part of the solution and become the leader in environmental issues, because really it's something that, you know, doesn't only affect our lifetime, but it's something that our children, our grandchildren are going to be faced with. We created this mess for them, and we better start cleaning it up.
We created this mess for them, and we better clean it up. Think about that. This is a guy whose family controls this major corporation. His name is on all the buildings. And he says, we're part of the problem. We need to be part of the solution. Well, one of the many things we did, we started by recycling. And I remember touting how much cardboard boxes that we recycled and all of the phone books we got rid of and all the rest and how much we saved. And he said, that's not enough. He says, why can't we, as big as we are, use recycled materials? Well, take you back to 1990. If you had recycled paper, you write on it, it was terrible. So we started with an action team. One of the mottos I had on my desk that he liked is never confuse motion with action. Don't tell me how many meetings you attended. What did you do? What did you get out of it? So when we created the recycling action team, we said that the materials that we use must be as good as the virgin materials or better. Because we're not going to sacrifice durability, quality, or reliability in the name of the environment. It doesn't do anybody any good. Number two, it had to make economic sense. I'm not an economist, so I'll keep it simple. It had to cost less. I didn't say price less. I'm not looking for suppliers to charge us less, because if you charge us less and don't make money, one of two things will eventually happen. You'll either go out of business or you'll find a way to increase the prices. So we said, work with us, find a way to reduce your cost and be able to reduce the price, because you've reduced the cost and you've saved money. One area we didn't have to do much in is because of you guys, and that's metal recycling. That's always been around, and we had a 15-second commercial that I ran on PBS.
This program is funded by Ford Motor Company. Our new vehicles are made with more than 2 million tons of recycled metals, enough to build 250 Eiffel Towers a year. Ford Motor Company. Better ideas, driven by you.
You guys deal with tons and all that. I have to put it in a way where you could picture it. Otherwise, it's going to be tough. So we were looking for other recycling success stories in terms of plastic and rubber. So I'm just going to share 4 of them with you fairly quickly. But I got to tell you, it was tough. It was very tough because we dealt with big companies, and I don't mind mentioning them now because it was so long ago when we first started. You know, it was GE, Dow, DuPont. All of them said, yes, absolutely, we'll help you get recycled materials that you can use. We had a lot of discussions. We had a lot of motion, but we didn't see enough action. So one of the things that I like about Hannibal, just one thing, and that is his perseverance. And when he was told he couldn't cross the Swiss Alps, he said, I will find a way, or I will make a way. And that's what we ended up doing. And we had our team look to see who might have recycled plastic that we could use. Well, my team came back and said, there is a recycler in Troy, Alabama. The company's KW Plastics. Guy's name is Kenny Campbell. Oh, great. Give him an order. No, that's not how it works. What do you mean? Well, he's not a Ford supplier. Well, yeah, give him an order, make him a Ford supplier. Now he's got to pass Q1. We got to pass quality. How long does that take? Well, a couple of years. What? What can we do? Well, you want us to go out there and help him? We sent 2 guys. and Mike Padlin, and I'll think of his name in a minute. The second gentleman went down there, and they spent, I don't know, 3-4 months. Got them qualified for a Q1 flag. That little vertically challenged guy in the end is me. We went out there and we raised the flag and gave them that order that first year for 6 million pounds. That may not sound like a lot, but let me tell you what's happened since. We have used, just Ford Motor Company alone, from KW Plastics, 425 million pounds of material that did not go to landfills. Again, put that in perspective, what is that? Well, I put it in terms of elephants. I looked at Asian elephants, African elephants, male, female, added their foreweights, divided by 4, added their lengths, divided by 4. And that's the equivalent of 34,500 elephants going in one line. That line would go from Birmingham, Alabama to Atlanta, Georgia. Or, if you want to stay here in Louisiana, it would go from New Orleans, Baton Rouge to Lafayette. Create a mess, but that's how long it is. A second success story was turning carpeting into car parts. We were using nylon, but it wasn't recycled nylon. So we went to a company, and Wellman, we worked with them, and there's a Dr. Dean Chanduri that you'll be able to hear later on, was able to come up with a way to use the recycled nylon so that we could create engine fan modules and air cleaner housings as a start. And that, the amount that we used just for that one application was 27 million square feet of carpet that didn't go to landfills, enough to cover 3/4 of the New York City State Central Park, or Tiananmen Square, I told them 5 times. The Vatican, I told them 5 times. That's how much we kept out of landfills for 1 or 2 applications, and there's a lot more. This won us the Society of Plastics Engineers Award, and the reason I'm putting this on there is to add a little bit of humor. When I went, the day that Society of Plastics Engineers gave out the award, I was putting on my tuxedo, 2,000 engineers, it was a big deal. My wife says, "Why do you have a tuxedo on?" I said, "Well, I'm getting an award tonight on behalf of Ford." And she says, "Well, why are you getting the award?" "I don't know, they picked me." She said, "What's the award do?" I said, "What do you mean? The award doesn't do anything." She says, "Now I know why they're giving it to you." But Dee is back there. She'll remember that. One other success story I'll share. There are lots, but I'll just share a few. Petoskey Plastics in Michigan. We've used so much plastic for seat covers. It all got thrown away. We pushed them to use that and give us post-consumer recycled materials. And I just showing just last year, over 1 million pounds of resin was recycled resin was used. How much is that? You could put a stretch from New York to LA 10 times, or Detroit to Key West 20 times, just for that one application. Plastic pop bottles, I apologize for the word plastic pop bottles. That's polyethylene terephthalate. Anyway, we use that for car parts. How much did we use?
By Ford Motor Company. Each year, parts for our new vehicles are made from more than 50 million recycled soda bottles, enough to cover a 400-acre lake shore to shore. Ford, dedicated to protecting the environment.
I got in trouble with this 15-second commercial. Coca-Cola people thought that I was really showing plastic pop bottles filling a lake. They went to their chairman, Mr. Guizetta, who happened to be on the board of directors of Ford Motor Company. He went to Bill Ford, and he says, "Hey, my guys tell me you should stop this." I said, "May I meet with him?" I got to meet with Mr. Guizetta, convinced him that that shows that they don't go to lakes, that's how much is saved because there's recycling of pop bottles. He bought it. We kept it. Today, they use their own commercial, but in the interest of time, I'm going to skip it.
All good things.
The Rat Patrol had a lot. I don't want to spend any more time on it. I think you've gotten the message of what it is we're trying to do. Let me make sure I put this in perspective while we're pushing for recycled plastic, recycled rubber. The metals industry is the most important. We have 1,000 different materials, 40,000 different parts. 60% of an average automobile is metals. I continue to think metals will play that kind of a role for a continuing future. I thought it'd be fair. I checked with the sustainability groups of both GM and Chrysler, pardon me, FCA, Fiat Chrysler Automobiles, to give you a little bit perspective what they have, and I thought I'd show you a couple things. What GM is doing is keeping their facilities landfill-free, 152 of them, including 100 manufacturing sites. And why? You know what? I keep pushing on environmentalism and economics. This is good for the environment, good for the bottom line. They're generating $1 billion of revenue by doing the right thing. 2.5 million tons of waste are recycled. And they say waste is simply a resource that's out of place. I agree. Let me tell you somebody else that agrees. Henry Ford I. He was a real conservationist, I think, before the term came out. He built the Model T with hemp. He called it a car that was grown out of the soil. He had hemp and plastic panels. His suit was made out of soy. I just learned yesterday that he used to order some materials right out of here, the Spanish moss, 5 cents a pound. He used to tell them to put it in wooden boxes. When it's delivered, he used the Spanish moss in seats. He used the wood for the dashboard. He had a company by the name of Timken that all of you, I'm sure, know. Timken supplied us bearings. He used to tell them what kind of wooden boxes to put the bearings in, and they laughed at him. Who cares? Well, they found out after he took the bearings out of the boxes, he used the wood as floorboards for the Model T and on the side of the Woody station wagon. Does that make sense? I'm not going to spend any time on this, but just to tell you the renewable materials that are at Ford already today in the pursuit of Henry Ford's dream. I asked our sustainability research team, Scientific Innovations, what are they working on? They're talking about increasing the use of recycled materials, continuing to develop plant-based renewables, things that you would absolutely know about. And they even put it in a slide form that's too difficult to understand, but you're using recycled materials, renewable materials, lightweight materials. Let me show you something.
So it's 3708, paper plastic.
Plastic. That's the magic word. Green police. You picked the wrong day to mess with the ecosystem, plastic boy.
Battery! Battery. Let's go. Take the house. Come on. Put the rind down. Sir, that's a compost inversion.
Oh, did you install these bulbs?
Oh.
Tragedy strikes tonight where a man has just been arrested for possession of an incandescent light bulb.
What do you guys think about plastic bottles now?
The water setting is at 105.
We got a TDI here.
Clean diesel.
You're good to go, sir.
Good afternoon, officers. Are those foam cups you're drinking from? Yeah. Please step out of the car and put them on the hood.
I wanted to show you that others are really pushing this. And for our legal counsel that's here, I got permission from Germany to be able to run that. Say that again? You're right. Didn't spend any time on tires, but I want to just a couple minutes on it real quick. There is about 1 tire per individual that is, quote, thrown away or retired. And what do we do with them? For the most part, we used to burn them and we used to bury them. Well, that's not good. Well, I inherited a situation around 2001 where we had 10 million tires to do something with. We wanted to make sure they didn't end up in landfills. We wanted to make sure they did not end up being used for fuel, even though I'm for that when it's done cleanly, but we couldn't be sure when you had that many tires that would be done. So what did we do? We had a company collect the tires, cut them into chunks, freeze them with liquid nitrogen, shatter them into millions of pieces. A magnet pulls out the metal, air blew off the fiber, and what was left is crumb rubber. What did you do with that? Well, when you have 10 million tires, roughly 12 pounds of rubber per tire, 120 million pounds, there wasn't a market for that much rubber. So we contracted with the same company that they would sell half. Went to Mr. Ford with his permission. We donated money so that nonprofits and others could use recycled rubber in applications like football fields, soccer fields, running tracks, therapeutic riding arenas, roads, therapeutic riding arenas. Horses walk on this stuff. It's softer, quieter, makes the horses calmer. And they take physically and mentally handicapped kids for therapy. And something about a horse's gait does something to a kid's spine. And I've talked to 2 mothers who, after years of using this stuff, says their kids can now walk, and they couldn't before. So rubberized roads, I only mention this only because Ford donated £1 million to Phoenix. Again, this is with the Federal Highway Administration help with the EPA. 50 miles of roads on the I-17 service drive have used recycled rubber. 120 miles of lane miles between El Paso, Texas, and Alamogordo, New Mexico, used the recycled rubber because we donated 100% of the money for them to pay for it. There are many other automotive applications. The only one that is really meaningful was back in the late 90s. We contracted with Michelin so they could use recycled rubber on our F-Series truck tires. Today, there's a company by the name of Lehigh Technologies. There are a lot of companies in the recycling business. I'm pointing them out because I'm familiar with them. They're out of Tucker, Georgia, outside of Atlanta. And that company has gone beyond the mulch, beyond the playgrounds, beyond the other stuff, and have used micronized powder. That's what they create out of the rubber. And the most part is 400 million tires today use that material. 6 of the top 10 tire manufacturers use it, but don't talk about it. I just want you to know that stuff is being done. What about future material needs from Chrysler? Fiat Chrysler gave me the information I could share with you. Again, they want to use renewable and recycled materials. They think there are opportunities for critical raw materials. Europeans are really pushing for making sure the vehicles are not only recycled, but use recycled materials, and they're interested in bio-based materials. Sustainable material research. I meet with our sustainability team at least once, if not twice a month, and these are some of the things that they're working on. Now, what are the emerging materials? Well, you can read that. Obviously, alloys. You guys all know about that. You've got ceramics, carbon fiber, and nanotechnology. Any of these things can take a heck of a lot of time to talk about. Future material needs. That might be of interest. Anything that can reduce the weight of a vehicle, improve dynamics. Obviously, you know what that's all about. Fuel economy improvements. Anything that reduces corrosion, increases lifespan, enhances visual cues. Again, you got safety, and you also have durability. Anything that improves manufacturing throughput and reduces labor. Cost reduction, obviously. And again, volatile organic compounds are important to look at. For this group, I thought I'd share something that I wasn't planning to share, but I'm glad I brought it. And that's because we talk about construction. We talk about construction in a different format than an automobile. Ford Motor Company, as I remember, again, 46 years, so I remember a lot. And we had 2,360 acres in Dearborn, Michigan. So built facilities, lots of employees. Well, it becomes time to improve because we cannot, among other things, hire young people to come work for us versus Google and Apple when the kinds of facilities they work in are still from 30, 40, 50 years ago. And what they're doing is renovating this entire campus, and they're transforming it modern. Green is one element, but this 10-year transformation is going to take 30,000. These are engineers primarily. I should say these are, well, salaried employees for the most part. Quite a few of them are engineers. And that is 30,000 employees. They're now in 70 different buildings. And what they're going to be doing in Dearborn, Michigan, is composing a campus for what we call the world headquarters and a campus for product. and we're talking about 7.5 million square feet. Why should you be interested? Because of the fact Bill Ford told them environment is one of the elements you will do when you're doing this renovation. So they want aggressive recycling of all demolition materials. They want to use a high level of recycling materials. They want to achieve leadership in environmental and engineering design at the highest levels that they can. Obviously, reducing consumption of water and energy. I spent no time, but that was been something been working on since 2000. So if you're interested, by all means, you can contact Ford Land directly. If you want to hear ideas on how to sell to the auto industry with your recycle, join us at 11:15, and that'll be selling recycled materials to auto firms. I want to close basically with a Bill Ford philosophy that I love. I told him that on March 22nd that I plan on using this again. And he says, I believe the distinction between a good company and a great company is this. A good company offers excellent products and services. A great company not only offers excellent products and services, but strives to make the world a better place. Ladies and gentlemen, isn't that a great goal? Because all of us need to be keepers of the environment, not just users of it. And I know we had Earth Day, but protecting the environment is everyone's responsibility. And you, ISRI members, should be commended for all that you're doing because it's helping it, and I want to applaud for you. Thank you.
All right. And if you want to make yourself comfortable,
okay.
Excuse me, I think maybe easier to take questions from the seat, the seats. But if you've heard now two kind of different areas in the economy of what's going on with heavy recycling overtones. What's on your mind? Again, I said this early and there weren't a lot of people in the room, so if you don't come up with questions, I will. The acoustics are decent in here, so I think that we can probably hear you. But otherwise, if you guys don't come up with questions, go ahead there, Gary.
Andy, this is questions for you.
Yes, sir.
Obviously, Ford should be commended for what you've done, but why aren't more manufacturers adopting this strategy? Why aren't we seeing it in a greater way?
Can everybody in the back hear the question? Okay, so the question was, why aren't more manufacturers moving in this direction of more sustainability?
I think a lot of companies really are doing things, they just don't talk about it as much. However, I do personally believe, and it's very biased because I was personally involved, that when you have a champion like Bill Ford, when the whole company knows that he's about that. Let me tell you how much of a champion he was. I think I can tell this. When he was ready to become a member of the board of directors, I won't say who, but a high-level person told him, you know what? You have to get rid of being a member of those Looney Tune organizations that deal with, tree hugging. He says, no. We tried to set up an environmental committee. He tried, I shouldn't say we. And he was told no, because if we have meetings on the environment, people are thinking that we're going to do something bad, so you can't have that. When we first came up with some recycled materials, I personally went to the chief engineer and I said, hey, we have something that you can use on your tail lamp housings made out of recycled materials. And he said, why do I want to use that crap? I said, well, no, this meets or exceeds your standards. Well, the stuff I have already meets or exceeds my standards. I said, what if it saved you money? Oh, and you'll meet my standards? And that's what it took to make that happen. It's a lot of work. It doesn't happen easily. I'll give you one last example, very simple. I thought we'd send a message by having business cards made out of recycled paper with the chasing, arrows on there. What's the big deal? Purchasing told me I couldn't do that. Why not? Well, because the chasing arrows are green, the oval is blue, it's one extra pass, it'll cost you. Well, okay, I'll take the chasing arrows in blue. Well, you still can't do that. Why not? Well, you're going to have some on recycled paper and some on virgin paper. You've reduced the volume. I said, fine, I'll have 100% recycled paper. Oh, you still can't do that. Now why? Well, recycled paper costs more. You can't get it. Well, you could quit. So I said, how many suppliers supply us business cards? Good. We have a large company. He said 4. I said, ask all 4 of them if they had 100% of the business, what would they charge? We ended up saving 26%. The amount of money was negligible, but the concept worked, and we got soy ink on top of that.
Great.
So it takes a lot of work to make some of that happen.
Ken, do you want to hit that from LEED kind of perspective on buildings?
It's clearly here to stay. I think that owners are obviously focused on that bottom line, and you need an Andy show to convince many of them that they can save money by going to that higher environmental standard. That can be a tough sale to make. But I think the combination of regulatory mandates, which I can't say I favor necessarily, but the bottom line economics for private owners means that we're gradually seeing not just the spread of environmental standards being part of building specs, but ever escalating standards or use of materials and methods. And I think this can also play into that search by contractors for how do they reduce the use of labor. If you are adopting a method like building information modeling that enables you to avoid rework and avoid over-ordering materials, that helps you meet some of the LEED standards, but more important, it contributes to the bottom line saving and probably helps you get a job done faster.
You guys have more questions? Go ahead, Stephen.
You showed that interesting diagram of the interconnectivity between all the different companies. You mentioned Tesla. 2 questions. Tesla's about to make this big leap forward. What's your opinions on where they're about to head into this more major production and the lower cost vehicle? And do you find them, or do you see them staying sort of independent or being part of this interconnectivity?
Could everybody hear the question in the back? Okay, so once again, what Stephen's talking about is that complicated diagram that Andy had up about, and so Stephen's questions about Tesla and how maybe that fits in and whether that can be, Tesla's ultimately destined to be part of one of the other manufacturers, or if they're going to be independent and where that may be headed.
I'll be happy to take a stab at that, and it's personal opinion, so this is not Ford Motor Company talking. First of all, I believe Tesla has some excellent product, okay? So if you drive it, you look at it, you think it's great. They have very low volume. The amount of volume that they created last year was amount that Ford Motor Company sells in less than 1 month of one vehicle, the F-Series. Tesla has a brilliant leader who really knows how to sell. He's got some great ideas. So I want to give the positives. Being valued more than Ford and equal to or better than GM, I find hard to accept. Now, they are going to come up with a lower cost vehicle. They're going to be a year ahead of everybody, except I don't think that happened. I think GM has already introduced a lower cost vehicle, the Bolt, and a year ahead of Tesla. Tesla is quick and they have terrific technology. I think, again, personal, when they go to produce 500,000 vehicles, I'm guessing it's going to be more difficult than they think. Just like certain people become leaders and have good ideas, but it turns out to be more difficult than they think when they start trying to hire people, deal with negotiations for employees, deal with compensation other than our own stock, which is at over $300. You can buy Ford for $11.40, GM in the 30s. Great company. Personally, I don't see the valuation being worth it.
Ken, do you want to take a stab at the question? And the direction I'd like you to take a look at is from self-driving cars. Do you guys look that far ahead to see where you think that might come about and what that means for construction in the country?
I think the implications are enormous. I think that, and I don't know if it's 5 years out or 10 years out, but over time, we're going to see a lot less land and a lot fewer structures devoted to automobiles, whether it's manufacturing facilities, dealerships, parking structures, roads and parking spaces along them, or parking lots outside of buildings. I think this plays into partly desire and partly necessity of more and more people living in smaller, denser spaces. Some of it, they are tired of having to drive 60 to 90 minutes or 4 hours to get to Santa Barbara, and they want to be able to go where Marriott is going in order to meet up with its employees, where they can walk to work or hop on a subway without getting in that car. So I think the whole environment for structures is going to be changing. It will take a long time, but we're already seeing examples of that. Tysons Corner, Virginia, historically the classic office park and shopping center suburb, they are on a 40-year track to become a mini city. They already have the subway lines there. They're starting to get the infill of high-density office and apartments close together, all connected with the shopping possibilities. So I think more and more parts of the country, you'll see the offices moving into the cities or into those high-density suburbs. You'll see much less dependence on automobiles and demand for structures for them.
Andy wants to follow up.
Yeah, let me just add, because I'm absolutely in total agreement with what Ken said. One of the problems is that the average automobile is driven 1 hour a day, and you're paying for 24 hours. That is not sustainable. So we have to do things, and that's why you see us in San Francisco. Ford has bought a company, and they're providing transportation. Within our Dearborn campus, our employees no longer drive to meetings. We have our own service, and you call, I'll call it our own Uber. There are things like that that are happening already. And on the driverless vehicles, keep in mind some of the benefits. I mean, we have all kinds of displacement. But you're going to be able to have the blind people get rides. You're going to get kids, if they have to go somewhere, you can put them in that vehicle, it'll take them there. You're going to have significantly fewer accidents because something like 90% or 94% of your accidents are caused by the driver. Insurance companies may or may not like it. Maybe they'll sue the auto companies, I hope not. But there are some benefits, even though there are some problems. And it's going to take longer than even what Ken said, because you have to have all the vehicles being able to talk to each other in order to have all those benefits. But today, when my wife drives the Flex, she puts it on 60 miles per hour, and she puts 3 spaces in front of her. If a car cuts in front of her, the vehicle automatically slows down. When the car leaves, it automatically goes. That improves fuel economy, because I call it eco-driving, economical, ecological.
Go ahead.
Ken, you want to take that?
Sure. The question.
Did everybody hear the question? You want to summarize it.
We have this tension between minimum wage being raised over time to $15 an hour in increasing numbers of cities, and self-driving cars potentially eliminating jobs. Do we have these forces converging to really make a workforce that can't find entry-level jobs? Well, it's always difficult to see where the jobs that haven't yet been created will come from. But I do think that construction, while it's also moving more toward automation, robotics, and so forth, that it's going to be a powerful source of entry-level jobs as well as a career track to great advancement. I also think that while we may have a reduced number of cars, we will have a lot more autonomous ability built into those cars. There's still going to be demand for a lot of jobs related to servicing, parking, traffic control of cars. So the notion that somehow automation eliminates jobs, historically, it's really meant that jobs have evolved from doing things that machines do better into doing things that humans can do better. And I remain optimistic about that, although I'm not enough of a visionary to say what are those jobs that we haven't even thought of that will be taking the place of ones that we're eliminating.
Forecasting is very difficult, especially if it's about the future.
Right.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry to say we're out of time. I think that we need to give our guests a big round of applause.
Get up. Okay. Thank you.
That was wonderful. I'm glad I was here to hear it.
Thanks, Ken. Thanks, Andy. I would point out that I believe that most of the seminars and programs that ISRI's running here today start at 10 o'clock. I believe that the exhibition hall is open, and it will be open all day today, so please go in and see our exhibitors over there and take a look at what they have to offer. I appreciate everybody's interest in the program today. Thank you.